you doing, Mr. Daniels?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing good. The first thing I want to mention to you you were born in Brooklyn, New York, correct?
Correct.
What was life growing up in Brooklyn back then?
It was much more middle class than it turned out to be later on. That's all I can say about it. It was much more middle class, less downstream violent or anything like that. That's where we were born, but we didn't stay there very long. We finally wound up in Queens and then out into Long Island, my family and I. But I was Brooklyn born, and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting because when I was looking up the information, I'm so used to hearing the kind of English accent. So when it came to finding out you were born in Brooklyn, I thought that's interesting because I don't really get the Brooklyn accent.
Yes, no, I lost that a long time ago. I lost that when I was about 15 years old and went into a play called Life with Father, which was a family in the play from New England. I spent several years with it. I picked up that kind of New England accent without thinking about it, and I guess I've never lost it since.
Oh, nice, nice. In 1945, you were drafted in the Army, and you served as a DJ for Army radio. What was that experience like?
Well, it was kind of strange. I did, I think, 16 weeks or maybe 13. No, I think 16 weeks of basic training in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I made a lot of good friends there. Mind you, I'd been in entertainment most of my life, so it was kind of a pleasure to just be a soldier. And I had a lot of good friends with me, and we were sent overseas, and at that point, we were on this bus, and they pulled me off because of my identification as a performer. And so I wound up in a radio station in Livorno in Italy, and that's where I spent my time as a DJ. And then everybody else went home, and I wound up running the station with a group of about, 6 or 8 people. And, I was only 18. It was quite a good experience, and I will always remember Livorno.
Now, of course,
it was called the Armed Forces Radio Service.
Now, I want to mention this as well. You're actually an alumni of Northwestern University. Do you mind explaining how you got there and what you studied at the Northwestern?
I was in a play called Life with Father, and I went to the gentleman who played Father, who was also wrote the play with Russell Crouse, and I said, I'm wondering if I should go to the Academy of Dramatic Arts, and he said to me, he was in his dressing room putting on his makeup, he said, close the door, and I went over and closed the door, and he said to me, I'm on the board, don't go there. What you have to do is you're going to be drafted. You will get the GI Bill, and you write to the government to find out which universities has a good theater department, and that way you get your education, university education, plus the theater experience that you will get at that school. And that's exactly what I did. And I wrote to the government, and they wrote back, and they gave me a bunch of schools, and one of them was Northwestern. Now, my sister at that time was working with Walter Houston in a play in Chicago. And my mother said, I think one of these schools is up here somewhere, And so I wound up there, and they were interested in me because I'd been on Broadway. And so I went to that school at Northwestern, where I met my wonderful wife, Bonnie. And we spent 3.5 years. She was in a rush to get to New York. I wasn't. I loved Evanston, Illinois. But I followed her there after we graduated in 3.5 years. And that's when we got married.
Young love at its finest, eh?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And of course, when we're talking about Bonnie, you just mentioned about your wife, which it ties in really nicely with my next question. You played Dr. Craig in St.Elsewhere. She was also on the show playing Ellen. And
yes,
she also played Dean Bolander in Boy Meets World. So you guys teamed up a nice few bits in your TV careers. Tell me how that all came to be. First off, starting with St.Elsewhere.
Well, actually, it was before we were freshmen at Northwestern, and we were all in a room auditioning for a play, and I heard her, and I immediately knew that she was an actress, whereas the other ones I wasn't sure of, and I was a pretty cocky kid at that point. But at any rate, I waited at the door because I wanted to meet her. When she came by, I said, "How about a cup of coffee?" And she said, "You're too short."
Oh.
And I said, "Yeah, okay, how about a cup of coffee?" She said, "Okay." And we went out and had a cup of coffee, and we've been together ever since.
Oh, that's nice. At least she gave you the chance for a cup of coffee, right?
That's right. Exactly.
In 1986, you and your wife made history, becoming the first married couple to win an Emmy Award on the same night since 1965. How cool was that?
How cool?
Yeah, how cool was it too? We're both.
I love that. How cool. Well, I don't know. It was a strange thing for us to suddenly be together getting these Emmys. What happened was I got an Emmy one year, then the two of us got an Emmy the second year, and then she got an Emmy alone the third year. So we've got 4 of those Emmy Awards sitting up on our shelf here. That's pretty much all they're worth for.
I don't know about that. I think Emmys are pretty cool. I'd like to win one someday. Also, in 1999 to 2001, you served as the Screen Actors Guild president. How did you land that role?
Well, there were a couple of fellows who were more involved in the union than I was, but they asked me to come and have breakfast with them at this place that everybody had a breakfast with. They wanted to know if I could mention somebody for them who was prominent that would have a chance to replace the man that they had grave differences with. So I went with over there and met them for breakfast, and I was trying to think of somebody who would be prominent enough, but this turned out to be a whole farce. They really got me there because they wanted me to run. So when I heard all of their grievances, and they had a lot, I said, "Well, how about me?" And they said, "Absolutely." And I said, "Well, I don't know if I could get elected." They said, "You'd get elected in a minute." So I ran, I won, and I spent 2 years. Part of those 2 years was a 6-month strike, which was very stressful. We hung in there, and we got a really good contract. And so at the end of 2 years, I was very happy to have achieved that and to leave and not be president any longer.
You took it and you ran with it.
Well, yeah, I wasn't prepared to do it, but when they heard all of these problems that they had, I found myself volunteering. Now, I knew, being in the Army, you never volunteer for anything, but in this case, I volunteered. But I'm happy to say that it was a great experience. It helped the Guild, and we got a really good contract, and I was happy to leave after 2 years.
Explain how you landed the role of Mr. Feeny, because that's pretty much Mr. Feeny is my childhood.
Michael Jacobs, the producer, wanted me to do this fellow named Mr. Feeny, who was a teacher. Now, I thought that the name Feeney was a kind of a funny name. I thought, well, I don't want to play a character that denigrates teachers, because I find that they are important to our country and they're underpaid, and so I turned it down. And so he asked me to come to his office and to take a meeting after I turned it down. And I went to his office, and he said, "Bill, I have a great deal of respect for this role. I fashioned it after a man who was my teacher in high school, who was a mentor of mine that I greatly respected, and that's the way I'm going to write this role, even though maybe Mr. Feeny sounds like something that you might make fun of as a teacher. I said, yes, that's what I was worried about. And then he said, we're not going to do that at all. We're going to treat him with a great deal of respect, because I think of him as my mentor in high school. And I said, well, in that case, okay. And that's what happened. He treated Mr. Feeney with a great deal of respect. And it turned out to be, I don't know, I was terribly surprised how iconic this role seemed to be from all the people I heard of, from all the fan mail I got, and people telling me how important it was, their lives and so forth. It turned out to be a tremendously wonderful experience for me to relate to people that strongly.
No, and I mean, it's a credit to you. You played the role really well. I watch Boy Meets World pretty much every few months. I'll turn it on, and there's episodes that really, get to your heart. There's episodes that you really deliver lines. Like the one that I kind of think right off the mark was the one where you wanted them to get tickets to the Super Bowl, and the whole episode is about Sean trying to get into college. And, Corey, Topanga, and Sean come to you and say, well, we tried, and that's all you wanted us to do. And, you got into them hard about saying, no, you don't understand what I want you to do. And I was thinking to myself, he's really going for this part. And even when I'm sitting watching it at home, I was thinking, I don't want Mr. Feeny mad at me.
Well, I have to confess, what do we do, 5 or 6 seasons? I don't remember any of it. 7 seasons of Boy Meets World, and so you say your lines and you play them, and then you forget them because you got the next ones to memorize and so forth. So I don't remember much about it at all, and now it's a bit of a time since then. But I'm glad to hear that. That's great.
I just want to ask you, because you said that Mr. Feeny was a funny name, and even in the TV series, Eric starts to use the Mr. Feeny call. How did you feel about that?
I don't know. I didn't know what to do with that. I mean, I remember I was in New York walking down 46th Street, and a bus of kids got out of their bus, and they saw me as I was walking down, and they said, Feeney, Feeney, and they came rushing at me. Well, frankly, I just ran around the corner to disappear from them. I had no idea why they were rushing at me, but I don't know. I thought it was a nice part, but that it would become iconic, I didn't believe in a minute, but I was surprised about it, and I'm pleased about it. Nevertheless, it was a very peculiar experience for me.
What's some of your favorite memories from doing the show Boy Meets World?
The last one, at the end of the show, I dismissed the class, and I stood there alone at the desk, the teacher's desk, and I looked over this empty class, and I said, I love you all. And I got to admit that I got very emotional after that.
Yeah, no, I would too. I mean, cluing up a series, cluing up a show, something you've done for 7 years. What's your relationship with the cast today? Because, I mean, you've also done a bit of Girl Meets World with them as well.
Yeah, well, I don't see them only very occasionally. You know what happens with these things? Everybody, when it's over, everybody goes off in different directions, no matter how close we were during the performance of the shows. Everybody goes off in their own way and pursuing their own careers, and you only very occasionally bump into them.
In the later seasons of Boy Meets World, it kind of got into more serious issues. Now, we didn't really get that with Girl Meets World because they canceled it. Do you think that if it was still on TV, we'd get a little bit more serious issues?
Well, that's a hypothetical question, so I really don't know how that would have been if it had run longer. I can't say anything about that.
Okay, no, that's fair. Did you enjoy, though, the Girl Meets World nostalgia? Because, I mean, my generation who watched Girl Meets World really liked seeing Sean, Corey, and yourself pop up on episodes. So was that
Well, I remember when I finally did the first few shows, here they were, much older now, and it was quite a revelation to me. Oh my God! Well, they were much older.
That's going to do it for this episode of Tobin Tonight. Our thanks to William Daniels for coming on the show. Remember, you can find past, present, and future episodes on TobinTonight.com, Spotify, and iTunes. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and leave a comment or two. For Tobin and myself, this is Jacob saying thanks for listening and good night.